to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here, and in this episode of The Hypnotist, I'm going to be having just a bit of an explanation of something I believe to be the case when it comes to therapy. And I believe that you shouldn't change. Now, that's a weird thing for a therapist to say. Most people, I would say if you stopped 100 people in the street and you said, what kind of people should change? They might say gamblers and drug addicts and people with anger issues and all these kind of things. And I want you to appreciate that a should normally is a value judgment. It's someone judging through their values and projecting them onto someone else. So what tends to happen when people start internalizing those value judgments is it creates a disconnect. It creates that dissonance where a part of them really feels that they should make a change, but another part of them really doesn't want to. So I thought it would be useful, since this is a therapy-based podcast, to just share my thoughts in terms of when you should and shouldn't actually make a change. So one of the key things that I thought would be useful in terms of reasons why you shouldn't change, simply, I guess the best reason for resisting the thought that you should change is if deep down you really don't want to. And I've seen certain cases where a parent, for example, has got in contact with me for an overweight child, and they have their values that their child should lose weight. I've also, in my early days, it was a bit of a red flag now, but in the early days, I would work with clients that their partner said that, you know, they really should lose weight or they should quit smoking. And one of my first questions after learning that if the motive is coming from someone else, that's not a good sign. As I said, but do you really want to? And if they don't, then, you know, in a pre-talk, I would just end that kind of pre-talk or end the session fairly briefly. Or I would say, well, if you don't want to make that change, what area of your life do you want to make a change? So simply not wanting to change is a very, very good reason not to change. And that's enough. You don't have to give any excuses. Another reason why you shouldn't change is simply because someone else, could be a parent, could be a partner, a spouse, a boss, is asking you to. Bearing in mind, a should is a value-based judgment. That's not to say there aren't consequences, and it might be that the intention of these people around you is that they genuinely do care. They're aware of the consequences. They're aware of potentially what will happen if you don't make a change. But that in and of itself, that they think you should change, isn't a good enough reason to change. It has to be an intrinsic motivation to want to make that change. For other people's convenience or values, for sometimes it would be maybe more convenient if, because normally there's collateral damage in a lot of certain things, excessive drinking, drug taking, for example. Other people could be caught in the crossfire. Now, again, if other people think that you should change for that, they might be right. But again, that doesn't mean that you should make the change just for other people if you don't really want to make that change. And then what it does is if you choose not to make that change, other people can make changes around you. So quite often, if someone is an alcoholic, for example, and they don't make that change, quite often they will lose contact with people because at some level, the people around them have accepted that, well, if they're not going to change, then they will change their response to that particular person. Quite happens with drug addicts and people with anger issues as well. For society, Okay, so there are lots of society-based judgments. One of the biggest is that it is, let's say, unacceptable to be morbidly obese. Okay, that is a society value, and therefore the consensus in society is that, well, it's okay to be a little bit overweight, but you can't be morbidly obese. Just because society thinks something is wrong, okay, and there might be laws to back up certain things, let's say in terms of hard drugs, for example, which were quite often criminalized, that might lead to consequences that could result in you wanting to make a change. Quite often people will have what they interpret as a wake-up call. So they might be arrested. You know, if someone is drinking too much and they drink drive and they get arrested, that might be a wake-up call. But what that's doing is that is giving them a consequence for their actions that then creates an intrinsic desire to change. And it's the intrinsic desire to change that is the important thing, rather than society saying what you're doing is wrong. Okay, so there is a big difference. And just because, you know, let's say there is a society judgment that what you're doing is unacceptable, still isn't a good enough reason to make a change if you don't also agree with that society judgment. And let's look back in the past. There were certain times in history that slavery was legal, and various other things that we can say are morally reprehensible now were at one point in time socially accepted by society and legally accepted by law. That doesn't mean that they're right. So the key criteria needs to be your intrinsic desire to change, if that makes sense. And that's why interventions often have the opposite effect. If you're not familiar with the term intervention quite often is where friends and family members of a particular person are concerned and worried about a particular individual. And quite often they will create what's known as an intervention. So they will ambush them in an unexpected way and show them evidence of what they're doing, and quite often the consequences of that particular thing. Now, interventions can work. They can. But normally when they work, it's because there is an emphasis on communicating perhaps consequences that the individual is not aware of that are affecting other people, in which case that can create intrinsic change. Okay? But calling an intervention and saying what you're doing is wrong and you should change normally creates a polarity response. A polarity response is when it entrenches the other person and they have a deep desire to do the opposite. And, you know, I can recall a moment from my past where myself and my brothers were worried about a family member, and there was lots and lots of evidence that they were doing something to excess, and we presented that information to them. But of course, the individual perceives that as being shamed or manipulated or controlled, in which case it can entrench and reinforce what they're doing. So quite often it doesn't work. And that's why creating an intrinsic desire to change, getting someone to the point of threshold where the should turns to a must, and there is a desire to actually do it for their own reasons, and because they see value in the change, that's a crucial part of it. But an ambush or creating an intervention rarely works. So there are certain things that I've seen over, you know, many years that I've been a therapist, that people quite often use the word should, and quite often it gets picked up in a free consultation call that I do with people, and they said, I should really lose weight. You know, I should drink less. I should stop smoking. I shouldn't do drugs. I shouldn't gamble. You know, I should, be much better with my money. I shouldn't spend so much on shopping. Now, these shoulds tell me everything. And that is that these are value judgments that a part of them agrees with, but a stronger part disagrees with, because they're getting more value from the behavior than they would from changing. Okay? Now, if that's the case, and you can relate to this in your own world, for example, let's say, for example, that, you see certain foods, okay, and you might be celebrating, And you might say to yourself, oh, I should really be good today. I should eat healthy. But then you see delicious cake or something like that. Quite often, we don't do what we should do, and we desire what we want to do. And in the hierarchy of decision making, a should is very, very low down the hierarchy. A need is really, really high. So quite often I will detect the language in people that are struggling to change because they say things like, yeah, I should quit smoking, but I really feel like I need to smoke. Okay. They will do more to meet a need than they will to respect a should. Okay. And when you flip that the other way around and you make the desire to change a need, which you can do, you know, it's in a pre-talk and a consultation, you can get the desire to change to a need, and that's called crossing the point of threshold. Then you're creating an intrinsic desire to change, and that's a massive thing. So weight loss, smoking, drinking, drugs, gambling are all the kind of things that quite often people will say, yeah, I should really stop doing that. While they're framing it as a should, change is virtually impossible. Okay. When it becomes a need, I need to quit smoking, I need to lose weight, then I know that I can work with that individual to create amazing change. Okay, so certain language things to be aware of. But just to echo that point I said before, if you're thinking about calling an intervention with someone that you know and care for, there's probably a better way of going about it than what will feel to them like an ambush. So I'm going to end on a positive because I feel that's important, because I'm giving you lots of reasons why it doesn't make sense to change, or that you can't change someone that you love. So 3 reasons why it could make sense to change, and to change with a therapist. Okay, number 1, and it's the most important, is that you genuinely want to make a change. Okay? If you genuinely want to make a change, a good therapist can really work with that, because you already have that intrinsic motivation to have a different life. That's very powerful. Do not underestimate that. Your desire to change is powerful. That's the starting point. The second key ingredient to justify working with a therapist is that you simply can't change yourself. Okay? Because here's the key thing. If you really want to make a change, and you can do it yourself, it would be crazy to pay for a therapist to help you make a change if you already know what you want to change and you can already make that change. Save the money, change yourself. A lot of people try changing, and what they find is that certain beliefs hold them back, certain inner conflicts, or a feeling of, yes, I want to make the change, but I also want this other thing. So if that's the case, that you want to make a change, but you simply can't change yourself, that's a very good reason to find a competent therapist to help you. And then the third key reason why it could make sense to change with a therapist is that you don't want the consequences of not changing. Okay. And that's a really powerful way of flipping things. So if you ask the average smoker, do you want to quit? Well, no, is going to be the case in most smokers' case, because they link pleasure to smoking and it helps them relax with anxiety, with boredom, in social situations, you name it. So do they want to quit? Quite often it's a no. But do they want the consequences of never quitting? And once they start thinking about what would that mean, 10, 20, 30, 40 cigarettes a day for the next, few decades, what would the consequences of that behavior be? And quite often, for the average intelligent smoker, they have an appreciation that although there's no guarantees, it's highly likely that it's going to affect their lungs. It's going to affect their aging. So quite often, decades of smoking, people age quicker. It definitely affects on their overall health, increases likelihood of cancer and that kind of stuff. Would they want the consequences of not seeing their children or their grandchildren reach a certain age or a certain milestone? Probably not. So if you're thinking about a change in your life, it's better to think about not, do you want to stop doing that? Do you want to lose weight? But what's the consequences of never being at the ideal weight for you ever again? What would that do to your consequences? What would that do to your self-esteem? What would that do to your confidence levels and your ability to feel good in your own body? And here's the important thing. If you can accept those consequences, no reason to change again. If you're assessing, okay, that if you smoke at the same level and you continue to smoke, and you're comfortable knowing that, yeah, you might die 10, 20 years earlier than you would if you didn't, and that it might make you look a bit older, and you're good with that, absolutely no reason to change. Why would you? And that can apply to any area of your life. There are gamblers out there that are spending 20, 30, 40% of their disposable income on gambling. But if they can reconcile those consequences, don't change. So just to mirror those three things back again in terms of genuine reasons to change. You genuinely want to, you can't simply do it to yourself, and you don't want the consequences of not changing. Now, if you're listening to that, and some of these are ringing a few bells here, there will be a link next to this recording, either on YouTube or the podcast, where you can book a free 30-minute consultation call where I can explore how I would work with you to create a change, but only if it's a change you want to make. And I'm going to leave you with one final anecdote, really, which is, I found it quite funny. Someone called me up, and I didn't recognize the number, so chances are it was a potential client. And they said, "You, Adam, are you the hypnotherapist?" I said, "Yes." They said, "I've got a problem, and I think I should change." Okay, immediately my ears pricked up, because it's like, should, you don't really want to. And I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, I've done some research online, and it looks like I'm a psychopath." Okay. And I said, "Well, how do you know that's true?" And he said, "Well, I've done numerous kind of quizzes and tests online, and I have all of the attributes of a psychopath." And I said, "What are some of those attributes?" He said, I lack empathy, and I'm not very considerate of other people, and I have a big ego, and it's all about me, and all these different kind of things." And I said, "Okay, do you want to change?" And he's like, "Not really, but I think I should." And I said, "Why should you change?" And he said, "Well, it's not good to be a psychopath, is it?" So he was seeking validation from me. And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Are you causing harm to yourself?" And he said, "Well, no." And I said, "Are you causing harm to other people? Like actual pain?" And he said, "Well, sometimes I'm a bit selfish and I don't really think about other people." And I said, "But is that actually causing pain and consequences for them?" He said, "Well, not really." And I said, "Well, here's the key thing. Even if you are, okay, one of a tiny percentage of the population that would fall into the classification of a psychopath, if you're not harming yourself and you're not harming other people, then there is no need to change. Okay, there is only one reason to change, and that is if you truly want to change. Okay, my advice is go away, really think about your life, and if it reaches the point where you change your should to a must, instead of I should change, I really want to change and I need to change, then get back in contact with me. And that's when someone has self-diagnosed themselves as being a psychopath. So if someone gets in contact with me and they're overweight based on society standards, okay, it's the same question. Do you want to make a change? Does it feel like something that you actually want? You want that kind of life where you're slimmer and healthier. And if you don't, then why work with me? And a lot of the time, I would say not a lot of the time, a small percentage of the time, the people that reach out to me are not doing it for their reasons, and they don't truly want to make a change. And that's something now, after doing this for nearly a decade, I've got enough experience to be able to filter out those people that do want to change, as opposed to those people that just feel like they should make a change. And if you feel like you should make a change, but you don't really want to, that is more than enough reason not to make a change. Hope you found that useful. But if you are one of those people that do want to make a change, click on the link nearby and you can book a free 30-minute consultation call with me, and we can explore what that would look like. I appreciate that you might be listening to this hoping to hear a hypnosis session, I've got a few hundred of them, either on my podcast, so just pick a different one, or indeed on adamcox.co.uk. And if you use the coupon code FREE, there is lots of ones to choose from where you can get a free download entirely free without charge whatsoever. So if you were seeking hypnosis, you can still get that hypnosis, but this is more what's the criteria for actually wanting to make a change. Hope you found that useful. Take care. See you soon.